And I suppose it was brilliant to hear we have asset managers making those choices, and you're right, we all have to play our own role in that, and I think you're hearing from Tony later today and from Make My Money Matter and places that where we can put pressure, but I suppose the reality is it's still only a portion of the overall capital, and I suppose this is where regulation comes in. So maybe take a quick gulp of your coffee, folks, because we're going into some techie regulation. So very comfortable. I love it. I'm a techie geek, regulation geek, but stick with it because it's important. Emery, the Green Finance Institute just released some guidance notes, thought paper on the UK green taxonomy. Can you explain what is the UK green taxonomy and why we all need to understand it and why it's so important for making that shift of capital flows?
Sure. So taxonomy has nothing to do with stuffing dead animals. It's actually it refers to the classification of what economic activities are genuinely green and aligned with a net zero agenda. And it's absolutely critical when you listen to Kate and Beavis and the decisions that they're making about where they're going to invest, that there is a bedrock, there's a foundation for them to define what is green and what isn't. And as I said earlier, we don't currently have that. The EU had a go at coming out with a taxonomy. It was based on science. It was very, very well researched. It also had a do no significant harm component. So it not only looks at what's green, it just makes sure that there are no adverse social impacts or other impacts as well. But then each of the 27 member states had to translate that endpoint into their own political pathways and realities, and the whole thing has become very operationally complex and clunky, and the investor community is finding it very difficult to integrate it. So we have an opportunity in the UK to take the best of what has happened in the EU with this classification list, apply it to our economy, our reality, and our pathway, our legal pathway to net zero 2050, and then provide investors in particular and provide business with clarity, what's green, what isn't green, and make sure that we start deploying capital towards, as Kate so brilliantly said it, the companies that are building our future. So it's an absolutely critical part of the regulatory architecture that will underpin so much more of how decisions get made in this space. And I need to finish on that because it obviously needs to be brought in by the government and the regulator. The government did commit to doing a consultation earlier in the year. That got delayed. The latest is that they are still committed to doing a consultation in the autumn. The work that we did at the Green Finance Institute with the Green Technical Advisory Group, which is a group of experts from across the market, have actually given guidance to government about how they could think about doing this. So there's definitely clamour from the markets and from the experts. They really want to see this go forward, and we very much hope the government will take it forward before the end of the year.
And what gives you hope, Emery? Because as Beavis said, a lot of us are frustrated. It's glacially slow. It takes so long to move from stage to stage. But you're right in the heart of that process. I mean, thank you, first of all, for driving that. But what gives you belief and hope that we are moving, or are we moving in the right direction? And are you concerned? Are you confident? Where do you sit?
When I look at the markets, the thing that gives me a lot of hope is this conversation maybe 15 years ago would have been Beavis talking on his own about beavers and the great work you're doing at Triodos. Now we have EY, we have Cazenove, and we could have a whole list of other mainstream banks and asset managers on this stage, all of whom would be able to talk very articulately about their transition plans. I know my good friend James Close is speaking in a moment from NatWest. All the work that is genuinely being done. So this is not mainstream yet. It is still a nascent industry, but there are so many people that are focused on this and realize that they need to have a strategy and they need to start operationalizing. So that's fantastic. On the geopolitical side, Rob, you said this is a race for investment, and it absolutely is. This is, last year, over $1.1 trillion was invested globally in clean energy. For the first time ever, the same amount that went into oil and gas exploration. We're never going to see that equivalence again, because from now on it will be more clean energy and it will be less on the oil and gas side. but half of that came from China. And in response to that $560 billion that was spent by China, the US came out with its Inflation Reduction Act. So that's $369 billion initially up front, but could be a lot more, to help provide subsidies and incentives to actually enter what is effectively a clean energy arms race between two of the global superpowers. As you said, the EU is trying to catch up. And here in the UK, where we have the deepest pools of institutional capital in the world, we have a market-leading, world-leading financial market in London. We have an opportunity to actually make sure that we are at the forefront of actually catalyzing private capital by using government money, government regulation in a smart way, different way than we have been doing, I would say, in a number of spaces. But actually, we have an opportunity to actually attract those jobs and attract that prosperity to the UK. We really cannot afford to have the next year to have this agenda be turned into a political football. It's based on science, it is inevitable, and the UK needs to be at the forefront of it.
Thanks, Anne-Marie. Kate, you're as you said, you're an asset manager. You've got, I suppose, hands on some of these levers that Remy is talking about. But obviously your job is also to find returns. Yep. Are you seeing a shift when you talk to your customers and your clients? Is it all about returns? And frankly, are people interested in supporting these diversified funds? Is it only as long as they provide the returns? And where do you see your clients, the direction they're heading?
Well, the good news is that there's a lot of momentum behind the move for more sustainable investing. I mean, to start off with, we wouldn't see it as a choice between returns and sustainable investing. We see that over the long term, we believe that sustainable investing will more than keep pace with more traditional methods of investing. And in fact, our portfolios have done just that. They've outperformed significantly over the last 3 and 5 years. So we wouldn't see it as a choice. We are seeing an increase in interest. So over the last 5 years, our assets and our sustainable funds have tripled. So, it's a significant increase in interest. When we ask our clients whether they care about it, we get basically 10% roughly saying, no, don't just give me the money, don't really care about sustainability. We get another 40% saying, I want it integrated into investment decision making in order to generate me positive financial returns. Then the next 40%, I'm doing round numbers so I can remember them, the next 40% is, I want to do sustainability and financial returns, so I want both, that balance. And then 10% at the other end would say, I'm prepared to give up financial returns, I'm prepared to take on more risk in order to really generate, catalyze change. So we are seeing that. The other interesting thing and exciting thing is that there's evidence that as the money flows to the next generation and as owners of wealth change, so women are more likely to be engaged in sustainable investing, the younger generations are more likely to want to align their values with their investments. We're obviously seeing an increased amount of interest. There is some barrier breaking to do. So, people say they're worried about financial returns, they say they're worried about greenwashing, they say they're confused by the options, and of course that's the role of some, that's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to cut through that noise, give that advice, generate positive returns, and be transparent about the impact.
It's brilliant to hear you sort of talk about those categories of investors, because I think sometimes we can surround ourselves with people who we just think it's obvious, to your point, that long-term returns can only come from sustainable businesses, and that's where you should be putting your investment money. But we're not perhaps there for everyone yet. I think it's important to remember we've still got to push that message hard. Bevis, coming to you, we're talking a lot about the big numbers, right, and that we need more capital deployed, but there's also an element, I suppose, of how that capital is deployed to what projects and the impact that comes from those programs. And I'd be interested to know how you think about that in Triodos Bank and how you think about the impact of your lending and the investments that you support.
Yeah, the best future lens I can give on where money will have to flow is through our net zero target. So we set a target of being net zero by 2035 at the latest, which is the most ambitious target of any bank in the world. And we've sort of published our emissions and our avoided emissions and sequestered emissions in the portfolio since 2018. And we played a role in founding the sort of what's now deemed the best practice framework methodology for how you do that, something called the Partnership for Carbon Accounting Financials. So we're quite well informed of what is that really going to mean. And our near-term target of 2030 has been verified by the Science Based Target Initiative. But even a bank like us that's never financed fossil fuels, aviation, mining, high-emitting sectors, the earliest we think we can get there is by 2035. And the amount we have to grow the sequestered emissions in our portfolio, because as a bank, your Scope 3 emissions are everything you finance. So it's every company, it's all their emissions sort of in one basket that you're responsible for. That's ultimately what it means. So, but those sequestered emissions mean vast shifts in the capital we hold as a bank into sustainable forestry, nature-based solutions, regenerative agriculture, permaculture, and so on. And We've done a lot of work already and financed a number of trailblazing projects in the UK. The largest sort of nature-based loan to date is for oxygen conservation, who we supported in buying 23,000 acres of Scotland to rewild. But we've done many other sort of innovative projects in this area. But if a bank like us can see that enormous shift, then as an industry, the scale that we will have to have in nature-based solutions and investing in the natural environment is, you can't quite get your head around it. It is trillions. And then we don't have an industry that's at all geared up to do that in expertise, in risk appetite, and also in deal size, because a lot of the asset managers will want such, tens of millions, as you know, that it's not actually relevant for where those projects are in their development. So that's one of the biggest things we've assessed in terms of impact and then flows of capital into the future. Yeah.
And maybe sticking with you just for a moment, I suppose unfettered in capital will naturally make its way to the highest returns. And that's why we need interventions, that's why we need regulation, that's why we need policy. I'm interested to know from your perspective, do you think we're doing enough on grants, incentives, and other direct regulation to ensure that we have a just transition? And what would you like to see change? What would you like to see more of?
Yeah, I suppose if you're not familiar, there's something called the Just Transition Alliance, and they've produced some great reports, one of which is on the role of finance in a just transition. Rhian-Marie was involved in that as well as Triodos. And I suppose banks and other financial institutions ultimately need the right policy framework. And historically, we've had a policy framework that will do very well-intended things like car scrappage schemes and feed-in tariffs to put solar panels on rooftops that generally benefit the wealthy middle classes. So for me, a just transition means policies that will drive the capital flows and create lending and investment opportunities in things that provide a win-win. So if this country was to have a North Star, you would think that public transport should be the safest, most convenient, and cheapest form of travel. And then you can argue and debate in tribal politics how that's best achieved, but if you put a set of policy in place that will drive that and use of it, then banks and other people will, capital will flow to that. Just on the levers briefly, though, and the other things, I mean, the taxonomy and standards is very important. We've called for it for a long time, so you can really understand and the consumer can have confidence in where they're putting their money in what institutions. There's also a trapdoor to that, which is it can put the highest burden of proof on the greenest, most sustainable institutions, which is what we're finding. Yet there's very little burden of proof on proving you're doing no harm and that you're polluting and financing emissions. So we have to be much stronger on that. And if I was to challenge you and go and find out who the two biggest fossil fuel banks are in the UK, and then look at their ISA rates, you'll see that we pay 3 times more than their savings rates. And so I'm slightly hopeful that the FCA, the Financial Conduct Authority, introducing a new regulation called Consumer Duty, which is all about putting the onus on banks to demonstrate they're giving fair value to their customers. I hope that will be another route to really go after banks and say that should be utterly unacceptable.
Indeed, and we should all come and tap into your ISA if it's paying 3 times.
Well, there are higher paying ISAs, sadly, but you won't find a stronger proposition versus the fossil fuel banks, I think.